Carlos Castaneda's A Separate Reality, Part 1, The Preliminaries of Seeing, Chapter 4. On September 4th, 1968, I went to Sonora to visit Don Juan, following a request he made during my previous visit to him. I stopped on the way in Hermosillo to buy him a non-commercial tequila called Bacanora. His request seemed very odd to me at the time, since I knew he disliked drinking, but I bought 4 bottles and put them in a box along with other things I had brought for him. Why you got 4 bottles? He said, laughing, when he opened the box. I asked you to buy me one. I believe you thought the Bacanora was for me, but it's for my grandson, Lucio, and you have to give it to him as though it is a personal gift of your own. I had met Don Juan's grandson 2 years before. He was 28 years old then. He was very tall, over 6 feet, and was always extravagantly well dressed for his means and in comparison to his peers. While the majority of the Yankees wore khakis and Levi's, straw hats, and homemade sandals called guarachas, I don't know if I get that one right, Lucio's outfit was an expensive black leather jacket with frills of turquoise beads, a Texan cowboy hat, and a pair of boots that were monogrammed and hand-decorated. Lucio was delighted to receive the liquor and immediately took the bottles inside his house, apparently to put them away. Don Juan made a casual comment that one should never hoard liquor and drink alone. Lucio said he was not really hoarding, but was putting it away until that evening, at which time he was going to invite his friends to drink with him. That evening, around 7 o'clock, I returned to Lucio's place. It was dark. I made out the vague silhouette of 2 people standing under a small tree. It was Lucio and one of his friends who were waiting for me and guided me to the house with a flashlight. Lucio's house was a flimsy 2-room, dirt-floor, wattle and daub construction. It was perhaps 20 feet long and supported by relatively thin beams of the mesquite tree. It had, as all houses of the Yankees have, a flat thatched roof and a 9-foot wide ramada, which is a sort of awning over the entire front of the house. A ramada roof is never thatched. It is made of branches arranged in a loose fashion, giving enough shade and yet permitting the cooling breeze to circulate freely. As I entered the house, I turned on my tape recorder, which I had kept inside my briefcase. Lucio introduced me to his friends. There were 8 men inside the house, including Don Juan. They were sitting casually around the center of the room under the bright light of a gasoline lantern that hung from a beam. Don Juan was sitting on a box. I sat facing him at the end of a 6-foot bench made of a thick wooden beam nailed on 2 prongs planted in the ground. Don Juan had placed his hat on the floor beside him. The light of the gasoline lantern made his short white hair look more brilliantly white. I looked at his face. The light had also enhanced the deep wrinkles on his neck and forehead and made him look darker and older. I looked at the other men under the greenish-white light of the gasoline lantern. All of them looked tired and old. Lucio addressed the whole group in Spanish and said in a loud voice that he was going to drink 1 bottle of the Bacanora that I had brought him from Hermosillo. He went into the other room, brought out a bottle, uncorked it, and gave it to me along with a small tin cup. I poured a very small amount into the cup and drank it. The Bacanora seemed to be more fragrant and more dense than regular tequila, and stronger too. It made me cough. I passed the bottle, and everyone poured himself a small drink. Everyone except Don Juan. He just took the bottle and placed it in front of Lucio, who was at the end of the line. Excuse me. All of them made lively comments about the rich flavor of that particular bottle, and all of them agreed that the liquor must have come from the high mountains of Chihuahua. The bottle went around the second time. The men smacked their lips, repeated their statements of praise and engaged themselves in a lively discussion about the noticeable differences between the tequila made around Guadalajara and that made at the high altitude of Chihuahua. During the second time around, Don Juan did not drink, and I poured only a dab for myself. But the rest of them filled the cup to the brim. The bottle went around once more and was finished. "Get the other bottles, Lucio," Don Juan said. Lucio seemed to facilitate, and Don Juan quite casually explained to the others that I had brought 4 bottles for Lucio. Benigno, a young man of Lucio's age, looked at the briefcase I had placed inconspicuously behind me and asked if I was a tequila salesman. Don Juan answered that I was not, that I had really come to Sonora to see him. "Carlos is learning about Mescalito, and I'm teaching him," Don Juan said. All of them looked at me and smiled politely. Bahia, the woodcutter, get out, Daisy. Not now, Daisy. Bahia, here we go with the cat. The woodcutter, a small, thin man with sharp features, looked at me fixedly. "Yeah, stay down there, Daisy, that's good." Looked at me fixedly for a moment, then said that the storekeeper had accused me of being a spy for an American company that was planning to do mining in the Yaqui land. They all reacted as if they were indignant at such an accusation. Besides, they all resented the storekeeper, who was a Mexican, or a Yuri, as the Yaquis say. Lucio went into the other room and returned with another bottle of Bacanora. He opened it, poured himself a large drink, then passed it around. The conversation drifted to the probabilities of the American company coming to Sonora and its possible effect on the Yaquis. The bottle went back to Lucio. He lifted it and looked at its contents to see how much was left. "Tell him not to worry," Don Juan whispered to me. "Tell him you'll bring him more next time you come around." I leaned over to Lucio and assured him that on my next visit I was going to bring him at least a half a dozen bottles. At one moment the topics of conversation seemed to wane away. Don Juan turned to me and said loudly, "Why don't you tell these guys about your encounters with Mescalito? I think that'll be much more interesting than this idle chat about what will happen if the American company comes to Sonora." Is Mescalito peyote, Grandpa?" Lucio asked curiously. Excuse me. "Some people call it that way," Don Juan said dryly. "I prefer to call it Mescalito." "That confounded thing causes madness," said Gennaro, a tall, husky, middle-aged man. "I think it's stupid to say that Mescalito causes madness," Don Juan said softly, "because if that were the case, Carlos would be in a straitjacket at this very moment, instead of being here talking to you. He has taken it, and look at him, he is fine." Bahia smiled and replied shyly, "Who can tell?" and everybody laughed. "Look at me then," Don Juan said. "I've known Mescalito nearly all my life, and it has never hurt me." The men did not laugh, but it was obvious that they were not taking him seriously. "On the other hand," Don Juan went on, "it's true that Mescalito drives people crazy, as you said, but that's only when they come to him without knowing what they are doing." Esquerra, an old man who seemed to be Don Juan's age, chuckled softly as he shook his head from side to side. "What do you mean by knowing, Don Juan?" he asked. "The last time I saw you were saying the same thing." "People go really crazy when they take that peyote stuff," Gennaro continued. "I've seen I don't know how to pronounce this, Huichol, Huicol, I can't even make it out. The Huicol, I'll call them, Indians, eating it. They acted as if they had rabies. They frothed and puked and pissed all over the place. You could get epilepsy from taking that confounded thing. That's what Mr. Salas, the government engineer, told me once. And epilepsy is for life, you know." "That's worse than being animals," Bahia added solemnly. You saw only what you wanted to see about the H Indians. I can't even make that one up. The H Indians, Gennaro, Don Juan said. For one thing, you never took the trouble of finding out from them what it's like to get acquainted with Mescalito. Mescalito has never made anyone epileptic, to my knowledge. The government engineer is a Yuri, and I doubt that a Yuri knows anything about it. You really don't think that all those thousands of people who know Mescalito are crazy, do you? They must be crazy, or pretty nearly so, to do a thing like that, answered Gennaro. But if all these thousands of people were crazy at the same time, who would do their work? How would they manage to survive, Don Juan asked. Machario, who comes from the other side, the USA, told me that whoever takes it there is marked for life, Esquerra said. Machario is lying if he says that, Don Juan said. I'm sure he doesn't know what he's talking about. He tells too many lies, said Benigno. Who's Machario, I asked. He's a Yaqui Indian who lives here, Lucio said. He says he's from Arizona and that he was in Europe during the war. He tells all kinds of stories. He says he was a colonel, Benigno said. Everyone laughed and the conversation shifted for a while to Machario's unbelievable tales, but Don Juan returned again to the topic of Mescalito. If you all know that Machario is a liar, how can you believe him when he talks about Mescalito? Do you mean peyote, Grandpa? Lucio asked, as if you were really struggling to make sense out of the term. God damn it, yes, Don Juan's tone was sharp and abrupt. Lucio recalled involuntarily, and for a moment I felt they were all afraid. Then Don Juan smiled broadly and continued in a mild tone. Don't you fellows see that Machario doesn't know what he's talking about? Don't you see that in order to talk about Mescalito, one has to know? There you go again, Esquerra said. What the hell is this knowledge? You're worse than Machario. At least he says what's on his mind, whether he knows it or not. For years I've been listening to you say we have to know. What do we have to know? Don Juan says there is a spirit in peyote, Benigno said. I have seen peyote in the field. I have never seen spirits or anything of the sort, Baea added. Mescalito is like a spirit, perhaps, Don Juan explained. But whatever he is doesn't become clear until one knows about him. Esquerra complains that I have been saying this for years. Well, I have, but it's not my fault that you don't understand. Baea says that whoever takes it becomes like an animal. Well, I don't see it that way. To me, those who think they are above animals live worse than animals. Look at my grandson here. He works without rest. I would say he lives to work like a mule. All he does that is not animal-like is to get drunk. Everybody laughed. Victor, a very young man who seemed to be still in adolescence, laughed in a pitch above everybody else's. Eligio, a young farmer who had not uttered a single word so far, he was sitting on the floor to my right, with his back against some sacks of chemical fertilizer that had been piled inside the house to protect them from rain. He was one of Lucio's childhood friends, powerful looking and, although shorter than Lucio, more stocky and better built. Eligio seemed concerned about Don Juan's words. Baea was trying to come back with a comment, but Eligio interrupted him. In what way would peyote change all this? He asked. It seems to me that a man is born to work all his life like mules do. Mescalito changes everything, Don Juan said. Yet we still have to work like everybody else, like mules. I said there was a spirit inside Mescalito, because it is something like a spirit which brings about the change in man. A spirit we can see and we can touch. A spirit that changes us, sometimes even against our will. Peyote drives you out of your mind, Gennaro said, and then of course you believe you've changed. True? How can it change us? Eligio insisted. He teaches us the right way to live, Don Juan said. He helps and protects those who know him. The life you fellows are leading is no life at all. You don't know the happiness that comes from doing things deliberately. You don't have a protector. What do you mean? Gennaro laughed indignantly. We certainly have. Our Lord Jesus Christ and our Mother the Virgin and the little Virgin of Guadalupe. Aren't they our protectors? Fine bunch of protectors, Don Juan said mockingly. Have they taught you a better way to live? That's because people don't listen to them, Gennaro protested, and they only pay attention to the devil. If they were real protectors, they would force you to listen, Don Juan said. If Mescalito becomes your protector, you will have to listen whether you like it or not, because you can see him, and you must take heed of what he says. He will make you approach him with respect, not the way you fellows are accustomed to approaching your protectors. What do you mean? Juan Esquero asked. What I mean is that for you to come to your protectors means that one of you has to play a fiddle, and a dancer has to put on his mask and leggings and rattles and dance, while the rest of you drink. You, Benigno, you were a dancer once. Tell us about it. I gave it up after 3 years, Benigno said. It's hard work. Ask Lucio, Esquero said satirically. I gave it up in 1 week. Everybody laughed except Don Juan. Lucio smiled, seemingly embarrassed, and gulped down 2 huge swallows of bacanora. It is not hard, it is stupid, Don Juan said. Ask Valencio, the dancer, if he enjoys dancing. He does not. He got accustomed to it, that's all. I've seen him dance for years. Every time I have, I've seen the same movements, badly executed. He takes no pride in his art, except when he talks about it. He has no love for it. Therefore, year after year, he repeats the same motions. What was bad about his dancing at the beginning has become fixed. He can see it no longer. He was taught to dance that way, Eligio said. I was also a dancer in the town of Torum. I know you must dance the way they teach you. Valencia was not the best dancer anyway, Esquero said. There are others. What about Zacatecas? Zacatecas is a man of knowledge. He is not in the same class with you fellows, Don Juan said sternly. He dances because that's the bent of his nature. All I wanted to say was that you are not dancers. You do not enjoy it. Perhaps if the dances were well performed, some of you will get pleasure. Not many of you know that much about dancing, though. Therefore, you are left with a very lousy piece of joy. This is why you fellows are all drunkards. Look at my grandson here. Cut it out, Grandpa, Lucio protested. He's not lazy or stupid, Don Juan went on. But what else does he do besides drink? He buys leather jackets, Gennaro remarked, and the whole audience roared. Lucio gulped down more bacanora. And how is peyote going to change that? Eligio asked. If Lucio would seek the protector, Don Juan said, his life would be changed. I don't know exactly how, but I am sure it would be different. He would stop drinking. Is that what you mean? Eligio insisted. Perhaps he would. He needs something else besides tequila to make his life satisfying, and that something, whatever it may be, might be provided by the protector. Then peyote must taste very good, Eligio said. I didn't say that, Don Juan said. What in the hell are you going to enjoy? How the hell are you going to enjoy it if it doesn't taste good? Eligio said. It makes one enjoy life better, Don Juan said. But if it doesn't taste good, how could it make us enjoy our lives better? Eligio persisted. It doesn't make sense. Of course it makes sense, Gennaro said with conviction. Peyote makes you crazy, and naturally you think you're having a great time with your life, no matter what you do. They all laughed again. It does make sense, Don Juan proceeded. It does make sense, Don Juan proceeded undisturbed, if you think about how little you know and how much there is to see. Booze is what makes people crazy. It blurs the images. Mescalito, on the other hand, sharpens everything. It makes you see very clearly, so very well. Lucio and Benigno looked at each other and smiled as though they had already heard the story before. Gennaro and Esquerra grew more impatient and began to talk at the same time. Victor laughed above all the other voices. The only one interested seemed to be Eligio. "How can peyote do all that?" he asked. "In the first place," Don Juan explained, "you must want to become acquainted with him, and I think this is by far the most important thing. Then you must be offered to him, and you must meet with him many times before you can say you know him." "And what happens then?" Eligio said. Gennaro interrupted. You crap on the roof with your ass on the ground." The audience roared. "What happens next is entirely up to you," Don Juan went on, without losing his self-control. "You must come to him without fear, and little by little, he will teach you to live a better life." There was a long pause. The men seemed to be tired. The bottle was empty. Lucio was with obvious reluctance, opened another. "Is peyote Carlos's protector too?" Eligio said in a joking tone. "I wouldn't know that," Don Juan said. "He has taken it 3 times, so ask him to tell you about it." They all turned to me curiously, and Eligio asked, "Did you really take it?" "Yes, I did." It seemed Don Juan had won him round with his audience. They were either interested in hearing about my experiences or too polite to laugh in my face. "Didn't it hurt your mouth?" Lucio asked. "It did. It also tasted terrible." "Why did you take it then?" Benigno asked. I began to explain to them in elaborate terms that for a Western man, Don Juan's knowledge about peyote was one of the most fascinating things one could find. I said that everything he had said about it was true, and that each one of us could verify that truth for ourselves. I noticed that all of them were smiling, as if they were concealing their contempt. I grew very embarrassed, and I was aware of my awkwardness in conveying what I really had in mind. I talked for a while longer, but I had lost my impetus and only repeated what Don Juan had already said. Don Juan came to my aid and asked in a reassuring tone, "If we're not looking for a protector, you were not looking for a protector when you first came to Mescalito, were you?" I told him that I did not know that Mescalito could be a protector, and that I was moved only by my curiosity and a great desire to know him. Don Juan reaffirmed that my intentions had been faultless, and said that because of it, Mescalito had had a beneficial effect on me. "But it made you puke and piss all over the place, didn't it?" Gennaro insisted. I told him that it had in fact affected me in such a manner that they all laughed with restraint. I felt they had become even more contemptuous of me. They didn't seem to be interested, except for Eligio, who was gazing at me. "What did you see?" he asked. Don Juan urged me to recount for them all or nearly all the salient details of my experience. So I described the sequence in the form of what I had perceived. When I finished talking, Lucio made a comment. "If peyote is that weird, I'm glad I have never taken it." "It's just like I said," Gennaro said, the Vallejo. "That thing makes you insane. But Carlos is not insane now. How do you account for that?" Don Juan asked Gennaro. "How do we know he isn't?" Gennaro retorted. They all broke out laughing, including Don Juan. "Were you afraid?" Benigno asked. "I certainly was." "Why did you do it then?" Eligio asked. "He said he wanted to know." Lucio asked for me. "I think Carlos is getting to be like Grandpa. Both have been saying they want to know, but nobody knows what in the hell they want to know." "It's impossible to explain that knowing," Don Juan said to Eligio, "because it is different for every man. The only thing which is in common to all of us is that Mescalito reveals his secrets privately to each man. Being aware of how Gennaro feels, I don't recommend that you meet Mescalito. Yet, in spite of my words or his feelings, Mescalito could have a totally beneficial effect on him. but only he could find that out, and that is the knowing I have been talking about. Don Juan got up. "It's time to go home," he said. "Lucio is drunk, and Victor is asleep." 2 days later, on September 6th, Lucio, Benigno, and Eligio came over to the house where I was staying to go hunting with me. They remained silent for a while as I kept on writing my notes. Then Benigno laughed politely as a warning that he was going to say something important. After a preliminary embarrassing silence, he laughed again and said, "Lucio here says that he would take peyote." "Would you really?" I asked. "Yes, I wouldn't mind it." Benigno's laughter came in spurts. "Lucio says he will eat peyote if you buy him a motorcycle." Lucio and Benigno looked at each other and broke out laughing. "How much is a motorcycle in the United States?" Lucio asked. "You could probably get one for $100, I said. "That isn't very much there, is it?" "You could easily get one for him, couldn't you?" Benigno asked. "Well, let me ask you your grandpa first," I said to Lucio. No, he protested. "Don't mention it to him. He'll spoil everything. He's a weirdo. And besides, he's too old and feeble-minded, and he doesn't know what he's doing." "He was a real sorcerer once," Benigno added. "I mean a real one. My folks say he was the best. He took to peyote and became a nobody. Now he's too old." "And he goes over and over the same crappy stories about peyote," Lucio said. "That peyote is pure crap," Benigno said. "You know, we tried it once. Lucio got a whole sack of it from his grandpa. One night we were going to town, we chewed it. Son of a bitch, it cut my mouth to shreds. It tasted like hell." "Did you swallow?" I asked. "We spit it out," Lucio said, "and then threw the whole damn sack away." They both thought the incident was very funny. Eligio, in the meantime, had not said a word. He was withdrawn as usual. He did not even laugh. "Why, would you like to try it, Eligio?" I asked. "No, not me. Not even for a motorcycle." Lucio and Benigno found that statement utterly funny and roared again. Nevertheless, Eligio continued, "I must admit that Don Juan baffles me." "My grandfather is too old to know anything," Lucio said with great conviction. "Yeah, he's too old," Benigno echoed. I thought the opinion of the two young men had of Don Juan was childish and unfounded. I felt it was my duty to defend his character, and I told them that, in my judgment, Don Juan was then, as he has been in the past, a great sorcerer, perhaps even the greatest of all. I said I felt there was something about him, something truly extraordinary. I urged them to remember that he was over 70 years old, and yet he was more energetic and stronger than all of us put together. I challenged the young men to prove it to themselves by trying to sneak up on Don Juan. "You can't sneak up on my grandfather," Lucio said. "He's a brujo." I reminded them that they had said he was too old and feeble-minded, and that a feeble-minded person does not know what goes on around him. I said I had marveled at Don Juan's alertness time and time again. "No one can sneak up on a brujo, even if he's old," Benigno said with authority. "They can gang up on him when he's asleep, though. That's what happened to a man named Savicas. People got tired of his evil sorcery and killed him." I asked them to give me all the details of that event, and they said it had taken place before their time, or when they were still very young. Eligio added that the people secretly believed that Savicas had been only a fool, and that no one could harm a real sorcerer. I tried to question them further on their opinions about sorcerers. They did not seem to have much interest in the subject. Besides, they were eager to start out and shoot the .22 rifle I had brought. We were silent for a while as we walked toward the thick chaparral. Then Eligio, who was at the head of the line, turned around and said to me, "Perhaps we're the crazy ones. Perhaps Don Juan is right. Look at the way we live." Lucio and Benigno protested. I tried to mediate. I argued with Eligio and told them that I myself had felt that way, that the way I lived was somehow wrong. Benigno said that I had no business complaining about my life, that I had money and I had a car. I retorted that I could easily say that they themselves were better off because each owned a piece of land. They responded in unison that the owner of their land was the federal bank. I told them that I did not own my car either, that a bank in California owned it, and that my life was only different, but not better than theirs. At that time, we were already in the dense shrubs. We did not find any deer or wild boars, but we got 3 jackrabbits. On our return, we stopped at Lucio's house, and he announced that his wife was going to make rabbit stew. Benigno went to the store to buy a bottle of tequila and get us some sodas. When he came back, Don Juan was with him. "Did you find my grandpa at the store buying beer?" Lucio asked, laughing. "I haven't been invited to this reunion, Don Juan said. "I just dropped by to ask Carlos if he was leaving for Hermosillo." I told him I was planning to leave the next day. While we talked, Benigno distributed the bottles. Eligio gave his to Don Juan. Since he was among the Yaquis, it is deadly impolite to refuse, even as a courtesy. Don Juan took it quietly. I gave mine to Eligio, and he was obliged to take it. So Benigno in turn gave me his bottle. But Lucio, who had obviously visualized the entire scheme of Yaqui good manners, had already finished drinking his soda. He turned to Benigno, who had a pathetic look on his face, and said, laughing, "They screwed you out of your bottle." Don Juan said he never drank soda and placed his bottle in Benigno's hand. We sat under the ramada in silence. Eligio seemed to be nervous. He fidgeted with the brim of his hat. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he said to Don Juan. "How can peyote change your life? How?" Don Juan did not answer. He stared fixedly at Eligio for a moment, then began to sing a Yaqui song. It was not a song proper, but a sort of recitation. He remained quiet for a long time. Then I asked Don Juan to translate the Yaqui words for me. "That was only for Yaquis," he said matter-of-factly. I felt dejected. I was sure he had said something of great importance. "Eligio is an Indian," Don Juan finally said to me. "And as an Indian, Eligio has nothing. We Indians have nothing. All you see around here belongs to the Yuris. The Yaquis have only their wrath and what land offers to them free, and what the land offers to them freely." Nobody uttered a sound for quite some time. Then Don Juan stood up and said goodbye and walked away. We looked at him until he had disappeared behind the bend of the road. All of us seemed to be nervous. Lucio told us in a disoriented manner that his grandfather had not stayed because he hated rabbit stew. Eligio seemed to be immersed in thoughts. Benigno turned to me and said loudly, "I think the Lord is going to punish you and Don Juan for what you're doing." Lucio began to laugh, and Benigno joined him. "You're clowning, Benigno," Eligio said somberly. "What you just said isn't worth a damn." September 15th, 1968. It was 9 o'clock Saturday night. Don Juan sat in front of Eligio in the corner of a ramada of Lucio's house. Don Juan placed a sack of peyote buttons between them and sang while rocking his body slightly back and forth. Lucio, Benigno, and I sat 5 or 6 feet behind Eligio, with our backs against the wall. It was quite dark at first. We had been sitting inside the house under the gasoline lantern, waiting for Don Juan. When he called us out to the ramada, when he had arrived, he had told us where to sit, and after a while my eyes became accustomed to the dark. I could see everybody clearly. I noticed that Eligio seemed to be terrified. His entire body shook. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. He was convulsed with spasmodic jerks of his head and back. Don Juan spoke to him, telling him not to be afraid and to trust the protector and to think of nothing else. He casually took a peyote button and offered it to Eligio, ordered him to chew it very slowly. Eligio whined like a puppy and recoiled. His breathing was very rapid. It sounded like the whizzing of a bellows. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. He covered his face with his hands. I thought he was crying. It was a very long, tense moment before he regained some control over himself. He sat up straight and, still covering his face with one hand, took the peyote button and began to chew it. I felt a tremendous apprehension. I had not realized until then that I was perhaps as scared as Eligio. My mouth had a dryness similar to that produced by a peyote. Eligio chewed the button for a long time. My tension increased. I began to whine involuntarily as my respiration became more accelerated. Don Juan began to chant louder, then offered another button to Eligio, and after Eligio had finished it, he offered him dried fruit and told him to chew it very slowly. Eligio got up repeatedly and went to the bushes. At one point he asked for water. Don Juan told him not to drink it, but to only swish it in his mouth. Eligio chewed 2 more buttons, and Don Juan gave him dry meat. By the time he had chewed his 10th button, I was nearly sick with anxiety. Suddenly, Eligio slumped forward, and his forehead hit the ground. He rolled to his left side and jerked convulsively. I looked at my watch. It was 20 after 11. Eligio tossed, wobbled, and moaned for over an hour while laying on the floor. Don Juan maintained the same position in front of him. His peyote songs were almost a murmur. Benigno, who was sitting to my right, looked inattentive. Lucio next to him had slumped on his side and was snoring. Eligio's body crumpled into a contorted position. He lay on his right side with his front toward me and his hands between his legs. His body gave a powerful jump, and he turned on his back with his legs slightly curved. His left hand waved out and up with an extremely free and elegant motion. His right hand repeated the same pattern, then both arms alternated in a wavering slow motion, resembling that of a harpist. The movement became more vigorous by degrees. His arms had a perceptible vibration and went up and down like pistons. At the same time, his hands rotated onward at the wrist, and his fingers quivered. It was a beautiful, harmonious, hypnotic sight. I thought his rhythm and muscular control were beyond comparison. Eligio then rose slowly, as if he was stretching against an enveloping force. His body shivered. He squatted, then pushed himself up to an erect position. His arms, trunk, and head trembled, as if an intermittent electrical current were going through them. It was as though a force outside of his control was setting him or driving him up. Don Juan chanting became very loud. Lucio and Benigno woke up and looked at the scene uninterestingly for a while, then went back to sleep. Eligio seemed to be moving up and down. He was apparently climbing. He cupped his hands and seemed to grab onto objects beyond my vision. He pushed himself up and paused to catch his breath. I wanted to see his hands and move closer to him, but Don Juan gave me a fierce look, and I recoiled to my place. Excuse me. Then Eligio jumped. It was a final, formidable leap. He had apparently reached his goal. He puffed and sobbed with great exertion. He seemed to be holding on to the ledge, but something was overtaking him. He shrieked desperately. His grip faltered and he began to fall. His body arched backward and was convulsed from head to toe with the most beautiful coordinated ripple. The ripple went through him perhaps 100 times before his body collapsed like a lifeless burlap sack. After a while, he extended his arms in front of him as though he was protecting his face. His legs stretched out backward as he lay on his chest. They were arched a few inches above the ground, giving his body the very appearance of sliding or flying at an incredible speed. His head was arched as far back as possible, his arms locked over his eyes, shielding them. I could feel the wind hissing around him. I gasped and gave a loud, involuntary shriek. Lucio and Benigno awoke and looked at Eligio curiously. If you promise to buy me a motorcycle, I'll chew it now, Lucio said loudly. I looked at Don Juan. He made an imperative gesture with his hand. Son of a bitch, Lucio mumbled, and went back to sleep. Eligio stood up and began walking. He took a couple of steps towards me and stopped. I could see him smiling with a beatific expression. He tried to whistle. There was no clear sound, yet it had harmony. It was a tune. It had only a couple of bars, which were repeated over and over. After a while, the whistling became distinctly audible, and then it became a sharp melody. Eligio mumbled unintelligible words. The words seemed to be the lyrics of the tune. He repeated it for hours, a very simple song, repetitious, monotonous, and yet strangely beautiful. Eligio seemed to be looking at something while he sang. At one moment he got very close to me. I saw his eyes in the semi-darkness. They were glassy, transfixed. He smiled and giggled. He walked and sat down and walked again, groaning and sighing. Suddenly something seemed to have pushed him from behind. His body arched in the middle as though moved by a direct force. At one instant, Eligio was balanced on the tips of his toes, making nearly a complete circle, his hands touching the ground. He dropped to the ground again, softly on his back, and extended his whole length, acquiring a strange rigidity. He whispered and groaned for a while, then began to snore. Don Juan covered him with some burlap sacks. It was 5:35 a.m. Lucio and Benigno had fallen asleep, shoulder to shoulder, and with their backs against the wall. Don Juan and I sat quietly for a long time. He seemed to be tired. I broke the silence and asked him about Eligio. He told me that Eligio's encounter with Mescalito had been exceptionally successful. Mescalito had taught him a song the first time they had met, and that was indeed extraordinary. I asked him why he had not let Lucio take some for a motorcycle. He said that Mescalito would have killed Lucio if he had approached him under such conditions. Don Juan admitted that he had prepared everything carefully to convince his grandson, and he told me that he had counted on my friendship with Lucio as the central part of his strategy. He said that Lucio had always been his great concern, and that at one time they had lived together and were very close. But Lucio became gravely ill when he was 7, and Don Juan's son, a devout Catholic, had vowed to the Virgin of Guadalupe that Lucio would join a sacred dancing society if his life was spared. Lucio recovered and was forced to carry out the promise. He lasted 1 week as an apprentice, then made up his mind to break the vow. He thought he would have to die as a result of it, braced himself for a whole day. He waited for his death to come. Everybody made fun of the boy, and the incident was never forgotten. Don Juan did not speak for a long while. He seemed to have become engulfed by thoughts. My setup was for Lucio, he said. I found Eligio instead. I knew it was useless. But when we like someone, we should properly insist as though it were possible to remake them. Lucio had courage when he was a little boy, and then he lost it along the way. Can you bewitch him, Don Juan? Bewitch him? For what? So he will change and regain his courage. You don't bewitch for courage. Courage is something personal. Bewitching is for rendering people harmless or sick or dumb. You don't bewitch to make warriors. To be a warrior, you have to be crystal clear, like Eligio. There you have a man of courage. Eligio snored peacefully under the burlap sacks. It was already daylight. The sky was impeccably blue. There were no clouds in sight. I would give anything in this world, I said, to know about Eligio's journey. Would you mind if I asked him to tell me? You should not, under any circumstances, ask him to do that. Why not? I tell you about my experiences. That's different. It is not your inclination to keep things to yourself. Eligio is an Indian. His journey is all he has. I wish it had been so for Lucio. Isn't there anything you can do, Don Juan? No, unfortunately, there is no way to make bones for a jellyfish. It was only my folly. The sun came out. Its light blurred my tired eyes. You've told me time and time again, Don Juan, that a sorcerer cannot have follies. I've never thought you could have any. Don Juan looked at me piercingly. He got up, glanced at Eligio, and then at Lucio. He tucked his hat on his head and patted it on its top. It's possible to insist, to properly insist, even though we know that what we are doing is useless, he said, smiling. But we must know first that our acts are useless, and yet we must proceed as if we didn't know it. That's a sorcerer's controlled folly. End of chapter.